and welcome to this instructional video for my AIR TYMR app. This universal app is designed for both iPhone and iPad applications. This is the icon on my iPhone 5 that you will see on your screen when you download this app. Tapping this icon on your screen will open the AIR TYMR home screen like this. Here you have three buttons available. The two main feature choices are the Crosswind Calculator and the Flight Timer, each with their own buttons in the center of the screen. The small circular information button on the upper right-hand corner of the screen will let you check the version number of your app and provide access to the built-in guide, which describes how to use this app. Tapping this information button, like so, will take you to the design screen, which simply presents the app version number and the company that designed the app. This will let you know the version number that's on your current device, and you can see whether you need to upgrade by looking at the App Store. The guide button on the upper right hand corner will open the built-in guide. This guide provides general instructions on how to use this app. Using finger gestures on the screen, you can simply scroll through the guide to find the information of interest. Please read it and experiment with the app so that you can become proficient with its use. It's fairly self-explanatory as you go through this. To go back, simply tap the Design button on the upper left-hand corner of the screen. Then tap the AIR TYMR button on the top left-hand corner of the screen, and it returns you to your home screen. Okay, pressing the Crosswind Calculator button will open your Crosswind home screen as shown here. This is a graphic screen which shows a runway and a wind arrow. There are several sliders to let you set the runway, the wind speed and the direction, and the wind gust values. There are also two green windows at the top that will show the calculated values for crosswind on the left and headwind on the right based on the slider settings for runway and wind. Let's show an example. Using the runway slider, set the runway to 27, which represents 270 degrees magnetic, in other words, facing west. Now set the wind direction to 240. The relative wind graphic arrow will rotate to the correct relative position to represent the actual wind direction for these settings. Now set the wind speed to 22 knots using the wind speed slider. Notice that the crosswind is 11 knots and the headwind is 19.1 knots. Both are still green. Below the crosswind window is a white crosswind limit showing a value of 15 knots. This is a preset value which represents a crosswind limit of a typical small aircraft for landing. If you tap the plus or minus buttons on the right of this window, you can change the crosswind limit. This will increment by 1 knot for each tap. Example, this is adding, and this is subtracting from it, and you can preset it to suit your requirements. Now adjust the wind speed slider to 30 knots, and you will see the crosswind window turn red and show the crosswind value of 15 knots. The red window is a warning that you have now reached or exceeded your crosswind limit. Now adjust the wind speed slider back to 22 knots. The crosswind window will return to 11 knots and turn green again, which shows the pilot that you have not reached or exceeded your crosswind limit. Now adjust the wind direction slider to 220 degrees. This will be shown in the wind window in METAR format. Notice that the crosswind has increased to 16.9 knots, and the window is turned red again to warn the pilot that you have exceeded the 15-knot crosswind limit. The headwind is also 14.1 knots. Okay, now adjust the wind slider to 170 degrees. And notice that the headwind window has turned red, and it actually shows you have a tailwind. The headwind label on this window also changes to tailwind. The window shows a tailwind of 3.8 knots. Below the headwind window is a white tailwind limit showing a value of 0 knots. This is a preset value, again, and it represents the preferred tailwind limit of a typical small aircraft. Typically, if you have a tailwind, you should be landing in the opposite direction, into wind. If you tap the plus or minus buttons, you can change the tailwind limit. It will increment or decrement by 1 knot for each tap, like this. Now set the wind direction slider to 180 degrees while keeping the wind speed set to 22 knots. Notice that the crosswind is 22 knots and the headwind is 0, as expected for a perpendicular wind. Now change the wind direction to 270 degrees and the crosswind becomes 0 while the headwind becomes 22. These slider input methods and graphic screen representation provide a very fast and convenient method to quickly determine the risks of crosswinds and estimate headwinds on landings. Okay, now let me describe how the gusts work. On the screen you can see that we have a runway of 360 degrees and we have a headwind of 10 knots. If I change this wind direction to right angles, we have a crosswind of 10 knots. So it doesn't matter where the wind is from, you will never exceed your crosswind limit in this situation. So if I go back to wind 360 and I increase our gusts, and the gust by definition must be at least 5 knots higher than your average wind speed and at least 15 knots to be a gust. In this case, a 15-knot gust is the lowest gust possible with a 10-knot average wind. Okay, so now when you change your wind direction, you will see that the crosswind and the headwind windows are showing the calculated crosswind and the calculated headwind, but it also calculates the gust crosswind component as well in both windows. When the gust crosswind component exceeds your crosswind limit of 15 knots, your window will turn red again. So it's exactly the same as the other mode, except now you're talking about gusts. And you can tell when you're looking at the window that the average speed, 6.4 in this case for crosswind, with a gust of 17.4, it's the gust that is exceeding your 15 knots, not your average wind. The same applies to the tailwind component. And again, the tailwind, if you have a tailwind, you should probably be landing the other direction. So that's pretty simple, and it's a handy feature to represent it. The winds at the top are shown in a METAR format in the crosswind and the headwind window. That's it. Okay, now click the link for part 2 of this AIR TYMR video.